Many of the places, temples, monuments, and cities built by our ancient ancestors are still around for us to admire in the present day. However, admiring them doesn't tell us anything about how they were built. The construction techniques and technologies of our ancestors are still largely a mystery to us. If the purpose of this video is to talk about ancient cultures and their fantastic technological achievements, it'd be wrong of us not to mention the ancient Inca culture of South America. How is it that they were able to cut a square aqueduct into a volcanic rock 1,000 feet above sea level 3,500 years ago in Chamis, Peru? It might even be the case that this is the work of an advanced civilization that came before the Incas, but they've left no trace of themselves in the area to help us identify them. Even the name of the site, which is Cumbe Mayo, just means thin river. It doesn't give us any clues about who created the oldest human-built structure in all of South America. The precisely carved aqueduct channels water from melting snow all the way down the mountain to the cities in the dry valleys below it. It's a work of ingenuity, and it makes us wonder whether the stone monks, which are allegedly natural-occurring 60-foot-high volcanic pillars above the aqueduct, are truly natural in origin after all. There are many fairy tales and legends in Azerbaijan about the true origin and nature of the Maiden Tower in Baku. It's a shame that none of them seems to get us closer to the truth behind the building's existence. Baku is an old walled city, and the Maiden Tower is the oldest structure in it. It's so old that nobody can say for sure when it was built or what it was called by the people who built it. Most educated guesses say that it's a 12th century construction, but there's a significant difference between the stones that make up the first 3 stories of the building and those that make up the rest. Those lower 3 levels are more likely to be 2,500 years old, and possibly even more than that. That'd make the tower older than Islam, meaning that if it's a religious building, it's more likely to have been put together by Zoroastrians. Alternatively, it could be an observatory. The stone protrusions that jut out from the tower correlate to the upper and lower levels of the lunar cycle. The name Maiden's Tower comes from a legend about a king's daughter leaping to her death from the top of the tower to avoid an arranged marriage. But there's no historical evidence to support this. There are several names for our next site. They're most commonly referred to as the rock sculptures of Abbe Fourne, but you might also have heard them called the sculptured rocks of Rothenau, or La Rochère sculptes. You'll find them on the coast of Brittany in Saint-Malo, France. Abbe Fourne lived in the 19th century but suffered a severe stroke at the age of 30, depriving him of use of one side of his body and leaving him deaf and mute. He became a hermit and lived among the cliffs of Rothenau, using the one good side of his body to carve bizarre shapes into the rocks. He started in 1870 and continued for more than 25 years. It's thought that he also created an underground gallery of wooden figures, but they were almost entirely destroyed by a fire in 1944. There are over 300 unique stone sculptures at the site, many of which are said to have been inspired by folklore tales of a pirate family called the Rothenau's, after whom the area is named. They were fishermen and smugglers of the 15th and 16th centuries, said to have superhuman eyesight that allowed them to see across the sea for miles. The tales are fanciful, but the sculptures are fantastic, especially when you bear in mind they were created by a one-armed man. Discovering how to manufacture and mold steel was an important technological breakthrough for our ancestors, but when did that breakthrough occur? Evidence suggests that it happened far earlier than the history books suggest. We say that because there's evidence of metal clamps being used on several ancient temples and megaliths as far apart as Cambodia, Peru, and ancient Egypt, dating back thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests that small metal clamps were used to hold large stone blocks together, even in buildings as famous as the Parthenon in Athens. But historians tend to gloss over the evidence because they can't explain it. The clamps' imprints can clearly be seen on several adjoining stones in significant ancient buildings, as is obvious in these images. but the steel itself is long gone. The most likely explanation is that the material was either stolen or used in other construction projects long after the megaliths were built. But the imprints remain in place as evidence that they were once there. Analysis of what appears to be clamp imprints at Pumapunka has revealed traces of platinum, a metal that only becomes liquid at temperatures of over 1700 degrees Celsius. How did our ancient ancestors even get it that hot? Never mind using it in their construction projects. Human beings first began deliberately harvesting olive oil approximately 5,000 years ago. The process works by growing olive trees, harvesting the olives each September, crushing them in a press, and then collecting the golden juice that flows out. In ancient times, olive oil was used for almost everything. It was cooking oil, but also lighter fluid. It was used to make soap, but also to make medicine. Even today, olive oil is the most essential ingredient in most Middle Eastern cuisines. The processes involved in creating olive oil evolved over time, and we can see the remains of one of the most sophisticated ancient oil presses in what's left of a four-roomed house close to the palace of Tel Hazor in Israel. Parts of the ancient machine have been reconstructed so the process can be demonstrated to tourists. But the core of the oil press is approximately 2,800 years old. It's a lever-based press of a kind that would remain in common use for the next 8 centuries. Stone weights push the lever down, exerting force over a flat stone which crushes a basket full of olives. It might look primitive, but it was effective. There's quite a lot of scientific guesswork involved in the dating the Gopashal rock-cut Jain monuments in Madhya Pradesh, India. The carvings, which are sometimes also known as the Gopashal Parvat Jaina monuments, might have been created as long ago as the 7th century. Alternatively, they might have been carved as recently as the 15th century. The fact that scientists can't be any more accurate than that is a sign of how little we know about these beautiful decorations which appear on the walls of Gwalior Fort. Experts tell us that the majority of the carvings depict Tirthankaras in a traditional seated Padmasana pose, although there are others that show him in a standing posture known as Kayotsarga. All of the sculptures are nudes, which is the norm with Jain iconography. Jain rock shrines exist elsewhere in India, but none with as many monumental statues as this site. It's almost as if the Jains tried to turn the entire cliff into one enormous shrine. History records that the Mongol Emperor Babar ordered the statues to be mutilated in 1527, but the Jain community eventually restored them by adding new stucco heads. Our next ancient curiosity is also known by more than one name. Most people refer to it as the Tomb of Absalom, but it's also sometimes called Absalom's Pillar. Whichever name you prefer to call it by, you'll find it in the Kidron Valley of Jerusalem. Mystery surrounds the origins of this monumental rock-cut tomb, which is notable because of its conical roof. The association with Absalom, son of King David, comes from ancient tradition. Modern archaeologists and scientists say that no such association is possible. Absalom is said to have lived and died about 3,000 years ago, whereas the tomb can't have been built any earlier than the 1st century. Also, only the lower half of the monument is a tomb. The upper half is a nephesh, a kind of funeral monument, and likely commemorates people buried in the adjacent caves, as well as whoever was buried in its lower half. The burial chamber actually contains 3 burial sites, but we don't know actually who was buried in any of them. Absalom's pillar was clearly built for people of great importance, but we might never know who those people were. We've been to France once already in this video, but we're going back there now to show you an incredible underground church. Building a church underground is far harder than building one above the ground for obvious reasons, but perhaps ancient builders saw working on such a project as the ultimate demonstration of their faith. Whatever the reasons, their work led to the creation of the underground church of Saint Jean, which is in Abattoir-sur-Dorne. It's the largest underground church in all of Europe. Scientists and archaeologists tell us that the whole church was carved by hand into a solid rock hillside during the 12th century. The style of the church is a little rustic, which is understandable given the methods used to create it, but the scale is impressive. Its main room contains two enormous columns supporting a 60-foot-high ceiling, and a hand-carved stairway allows visitors to climb the entire back wall and claim a stunning bird's-eye view of the site from above. Experts think that the church was originally built as a semi-secret hiding place for important religious artifacts. The Roman reliquary in the largest side room is said to be a relic of the First Crusade, and the 80 sarcophagi in the other side room are said to contain the remains of saints and martyrs. Both claims are impossible to prove. Let's move on to something truly mind-blowing in terms of both sophistication and size. We're talking about the Yangshan quarry in China, which is where most of the stone used in Nanjing's great monuments was quarried. Not all of the stone that was quarried, cut, and shaped here was moved elsewhere, though. Some of it, like its colossal unfinished steel, is still here. History tells us that the creation of the steel was ordered by the Yongle Emperor during the 15th century, who wanted to use it in a monument to honor his father at the Ming Shaoling Mausoleum. Workers got around to carving out the head, base, and body of the steel before appearing to give up, no doubt somewhat overawed by the size of their creation. The body is 30 feet wide, 15 feet thick, and 150 feet tall. We have almost no idea how they could possibly have carved something so enormous, and there's zero chance they'd ever be able to transport it. We can't help but wonder what convinced them that such a thing might have been possible in the first place. There is no correct answer to the question, what color is the Lycurgus cup? It could be one of two colors, depending on which direction you look at it from and how well lit it is at the time you're looking. The 1,600-year-old curiosity has been intriguing all of those who've seen it for centuries. The cup was made using dichroic glass, which can reflect light particles in a variety of different ways. If a light is shown from behind the glass, it'll appear green. But if the light is shown from directly in front of it, the color turns red. It's almost certain that the person who made it understood the principles of the glass that they were using, even if they didn't know why it behaved in the way that it did. Archaeologists have never found anything else like it, which perhaps isn't a surprise, given how delicate the cup is. So we can't rule out the possibility that only one ancient Roman craftsperson ever understood the potential for the glass and how to make beautiful things out of it. When they died, the secret of how to make objects like this went to the grave with them. Seen from above, this incredible invention in Gonabad, Iran looks like nothing more significant than a series of puckered holes in the ground. That's misleading. This is actually one huge interconnected structure known as a quarry. It's an ancient miracle of hydraulic engineering. It's one of the greatest surviving examples of an irrigation system known as a connet, a form of water transportation technology that's still used in some parts of the world today. Faced with life on a dry plain 3,000 years ago, the ancient Persians knew that the only way to survive was to make water come to them. And that's what quarries does. The system is made up of underground tunnels that run for miles, connecting wells to underground reservoirs. The holes visible from above provide ventilation to the tunnels and also provide access for water collection. Building just one average-sized connet would take many years, as all the work was done with picks and shovels. Building something the size of quarries must have taken decades. Systems like this still exist in Libya, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. We've looked at some large-scale mysteries during this video. Our final piece of mysterious technology is much smaller, but no less worthy of inclusion. If you're only taking a brief glance at it, you'd assume that the 2,200-year-old sculpture is just one of many ancient Egyptian carvings of birds. Look closer, though, and you'll see that aside from the eyes and the beak, it has a lot more in common with a modern plane than it does with any bird we've ever seen. The wings are thin, straight, tapered, and devoid of feathers. The tail is square, too. If it just happened to look like a plane, we could write these things off as coincidence. But the sculpture is also aerodynamically perfect. A research team made a perfectly scaled-up version of the sculpture during the 1970s and demonstrated that it was capable of flying and gliding. Is this an out-of-place artifact, or was there an Egyptian toy maker somewhere who made their child a flying toy, little realizing that they'd invented a test model aircraft over 2,000 years ahead of schedule? There are so many things that we don't understand about ancient Egyptian technology, but one of the most overlooked achievements of these ancient people is the fact that they were capable of core drilling perfectly round holes in solid blocks of granite. We'd have to use diamond-coated tube drills to achieve the same effect today. Some academics have speculated that the dynastic Egyptians developed tube drills made of copper or bronze, but these drills would still need to have been powered by hand. All attempts to replicate the technology using materials and techniques that would have been available to the people of the time have failed. The most outstanding example of this advanced technology can be found at Karnak, where the drills that cut into the rose granite must have been enormous, yet thinner than those that we use today. Based on the evidence, we can only assume that the Egyptians knew something about stone cutting that we don't. The work may even have been carried out by a pre-Egyptian culture known as the Commissions, but we know so little about them that it's impossible to be sure. Beautiful instances of golden gilding can be found on the golden altar of St. Ambrogio in Milan, with thin gold coatings applied smoothly to the carvings to give them a luster and a sense of importance. It isn't easy to believe the altar was built in 825, not only because it's so elaborate and well-kept, but also because the gilding technique should have been unfeasible for the people of the time. There are instances of advanced gilding from 2,000 years ago all across the world, and scientists are baffled as to how the gilding was done. It's of such high quality that even with all the latest technological instruments at our disposal, we can't match it in terms of quality today. Aside from being utilized in decorations, ancient fraudsters employed the technique to add a thin layer of silver or gold to an object to create the impression it was more precious than it truly was, then sell it for a profit. That indicates ancient con artists were more proficient than modern experts, and we're still trying to figure out how. Preah Vihear Temple perches at the top of Yantuk, Cambodia, in defiance of both the laws of gravity and the supposed capabilities of the people who built it. The temple, which can be found among the country's Dangrek Mountains, is thought of as the ultimate gem of ancient Cambodian architecture. There's been a temple here since the 9th century, but the current structure was built on the ruins of the old one during the 11th century. It's thought that the Suri-Avraman kings who built it wanted to replicate the beauty of the world-famous temples of Angkor. Their creation is an entire complex neatly lined up on the very edge of the cliff close to the border with Thailand. In fact, Thailand is so enamored with the temple that they tried to claim it as their own, challenging Cambodia for ownership in a legal dispute that went all the way to the International Courts of The Hague in 1962. The court came down on the side of Cambodia, but no amount of research since then has offered the first clue about the methods of construction that went into creating the temple site. We're going to go back to the ancient Egyptians now, because we're not done talking about their stoneworking abilities. Aside from being able to drill perfect holes in granite using methods we don't understand, they were also able to carve through limestone, granite, basalt, and other hard stones almost as if they were butter. In some instances, they appear to have done this using tools that were no more sturdy than saws. You can see saw marks on the basalt paving stones that line the east side of the famous Great Pyramid of Giza. The lines left by the tools are clean, sharp, and parallel, indicating that the blades were perfectly steady. This is a sign that the blades went through the stone quickly and easily. We have no idea how this was done, but scientists have speculated that the Egyptians knew of a way to use liquid to temporarily soften stone in a way that would allow it to be cut like this. The process is called molecular bond reversal, and is something that we're currently trying to master in laboratories all over the world. Scientists believe it's possible, but they have a harder time believing that the Egyptians learned how to do it thousands of years ago and then somehow forgot the secret. During its 2,500-year history, the Turkish city of Konos has been invaded and captured numerous times. Every time this has happened, the city's new masters have attempted to obliterate their predecessors' legacy. As a result, much archaeological material and information has been lost, making it hard to figure out who created the city's stunning rock-cut tombs. They have a Hellenic design and are thought to be roughly 2,200 years old. What little archaeological data there is implies that they were used until roughly 500 years ago. It's still feasible that they're up to 300 years older than the most widely accepted date, implying that they were carved at or around the same time as Konos was first founded. Unlike most old tombs, there's no distinction between rich and poor at this site. The 20 or so tombs with exquisite entry decorations and sculptures are assumed to have belonged to leaders or aristocrats, whereas the others are plain and appear to have belonged to ordinary people. We'll never know who's responsible for these magnificent sculptures and carvings, which means we'll also never know how they were created. Leonardo da Vinci, an Italian Renaissance master, is often regarded as possessing the finest mind in human history. In painting, science, biology, and sculpting, the genius was light years ahead of the pack during his lifetime, and it appears that he foresaw the future of military battle as well as the many other things he was able to predict. Long before a tank first rolled through the battlefields of Europe, or everywhere on the planet for that matter, Da Vinci drew up a rough sketch of what they would look like. Although he never created a prototype based on his idea, the basic principles remained sound. The Da Vinci tank had a removable top part that could be opened to enhance the driver's visibility and space for outward-facing blunderbusses. The tires were perhaps too thin to be useful in a muddy field, and the axle's crank design appears to be defective, but we shouldn't count that against Leonardo. Although a wooden tank wouldn't have survived very long on the field, this concept serves as a foundation for subsequent designs. Remarkably, in 2010, a group of engineers were able to build a functional replica of the tank using Da Vinci's plans. The Bocca della Verita was featured in the 1953 film Roman Holiday, starring Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck, and may be familiar to classic movie fans. This massive ancient stone, whose name translates literally as the mouth of truth, is believed to be able to identify when someone is lying. All the liar has to do is put their hand within the sculpture's mouth and talk. If they lie, the mouth is meant to close and slice off their hand. Some people believe the legend was made up for the movie and that the stone is merely an old and beautiful drain cover. But who would go through the trouble of engraving the face of the powerful sea deity Oceanus on a plain drain cover? And why? We'd rather believe the myths around the 2,200-year-old stone disc, which say that the movie's plot is founded on an ancient truth. Forget TV talk show lie detectors. Eons before any modern talk show host was born, this statue was sifting truth from lies. Is it a little far-fetched? Perhaps so, but all stories have to come from somewhere. A mysterious ancient Egyptian artifact was purchased by a Dutch museum in 1828. Its background is unknown prior to its arrival at the museum, but scientific study of the alabaster disc revealed that it's roughly 4,500 years old. 7 little holes have been punched into the disc, which could have been a tabletop in the distant past and was most likely used to contain oils and incense sticks. Some assume it was used for embalming, while others claim it resembles a control panel of some sort. For those people, the idea of being a humble embalming table is wide of the mark. They suspect something far more fantastical. The entire surface of the disc is covered in hieroglyphs and symbols, some of which have not been seen before on any other ancient Egyptian artifacts. It's quite possible that the markings are a set of instructions outlining the object's purpose, but we'll never know for sure as we've never been able to translate them successfully. Why would somebody go to the trouble of lavishly decorating a table just to utilize it for embalming? The Nimrod lens, according to some archaeologists and historians, is the world's first telescope. Others claim that its magnifying properties were utilized to magnify the sun's rays and start fires rather than stare at distant objects or stars, and that it was never intended for such a purpose. Who's correct? And who's incorrect? Well, the dispute has raged for well over 100 years and shows no signs of abating anytime soon. The item, also referred to as the layered lens, was discovered in Iraq in 1850 among the ruins of an Assyrian palace. It began as a simple lump of rock crystal that was cut, sculpted, and polished into its current form. The Nimrod lens has a magnification factor of 3, which may not seem like much, but it's the same as the telescope developed in the Netherlands in 1608. When the Dutch telescope was constructed, the Nimrod lens was already roughly 2,600 years old. Therefore, it's no exaggeration to state that if the lens was designed to be a telescope, it was thousands of years ahead of its time. The invention of the printer was an important breakthrough in mass communication, and it happened a lot earlier than most people would imagine. It started with a concept called movable type. Before it came along, any form of written communication had to be copied by hand from its source before it could be distributed. This changed when the Chinese inventor Bi Sheng came up with the first version of movable type in the late 10th century. His method involved arranging characters into small blocks of clay, which could be rearranged and then stamped onto a page to make the desired words and phrases. The blocks would be assembled and then glued to an iron plate, then pressed against the page like a stamp. This allowed ancient Chinese books to be reproduced quickly and easily, leading to a cultural revolution in the country. Bi Sheng's method remained the most efficient way of reproducing print until Johann Gutenberg adapted the idea into the Gutenberg press in Germany in 1438. Bi Sheng changed the world and was at least 400 years ahead of his time. Yet hardly anyone outside China knows his name. Astronomical clocks were considered to be among the greatest feats of engineering of their era. But taking all of that machinery and condensing it into something small enough to fit inside your home seemed impossible, until Italian inventor Giovanni Dondo del Orologio mastered the art in the mid-14th century. The clock he built was called an astrarium and contained over 100 moving parts. The astrarium had 7 faces and could tell the time, but could also tell you where the sun and moon were in the sky, along with the relative positions of the 5 planets that were known at the time. It could even tell you when the next holy feast would be. Giovanni's astrarium is considered to be the first truly mechanical clock to be built in Europe, and yet it didn't contain a single screw. It was hailed as a miracle by journalists who wrote of it at the time, few of whom could even begin to comprehend its complexity. Tragically, the original clock was lost somewhere around 1485, but the influence it had on clock design and engineering shaped the way that such things were built for hundreds of years. American inventor Eli Whitney invented a remarkable cotton gin in 1793. But when we say gin, we're not talking about a drink. Instead, we're talking about a machine that could separate cotton fiber from cotton seeds rapidly, speeding up cotton production enormously, and then processing it into calico and other cotton goods. It even separated off the undamaged cotton so it could be used in textiles and left the seeds behind so they could be used to grow more cotton. Whitney's machine used a combination of wire hooks and wire screens to pull cotton through its mechanisms while simultaneously applying a brush to remove loose lint and prevent the machine from jamming. His creation brought about a revolution in the American cotton industry, but sadly, in an unintended consequence, also resulted in significant growth in slavery because of the increased demand for cotton harvesting. In some ways, you could say that Whitney inventing his cotton gin was the first step along a road that led to the American Civil War. The invention made a lot of people rich in the American South, but it also indirectly caused a lot of bloodshed. When you first see Chand Baori in Jaipur, India, it's hard to know what you're looking at if you haven't been told already. You'll probably assume it to be an enormous ancient temple, but this isn't a religious building. Instead, it's the most incredible medieval stepwell in the world. Chand Baori contains literally thousands of stone water storage wells accessed by thousands more stone steps. The wells were needed because a steady water supply can't be relied on in the Indian states of Gujarat and Rajasthan. Monsoon season brings enormous amounts of water, but it disappears almost instantly when temperatures exceed 100 degrees in the summer. To solve the problem, a unique water storage facility was required. The earliest of the stepwells in the region was probably built in the mid-6th century, but they're nothing compared to the majesty of Chand Baori. It's a 10th century creation that's 100 feet deep and has temple-like aesthetics because it's dedicated to Harshat Mata, the goddess of happiness. The walls were once brightly colored, but the ancient paintwork has faded over time. Usage of stepwells in India declined during the time of the British Raj, but the splendor of this one still remains. The largest pyramid in the world is not, as you might have been taught to believe, in Egypt. It's not even in Africa. You'll find it in Mexico, but it's hard to appreciate the true scale of it because at least half of it is hidden inside a mountain. This is Teotihuacan, which translates into English as mountain made by hand. Most Westerners prefer to call it the Cholula Pyramid because it's easier to pronounce. This is not only the world's biggest pyramid, but the world's biggest human-made monument of any kind. It has an astonishing volume of 13 million cubic feet. That's twice as wide as the Great Pyramid of Giza, but part of the reason it doesn't get the recognition it deserves is that while it might be wider than the more famous pyramids, it's also shorter and mostly buried. Archaeologists have examined the pyramid and concluded that it was buried deliberately, probably by native people who wanted to hide it from the advancing Spanish conquistadors. Legend has it that the pyramid was built by a giant called Xelhua, who appears in Aztec mythology. In reality, nobody knows who built the pyramid, when, or why. It's hard to make clothes unless you're able to weave fabric. And if you're going to weave large quantities of fabric, you're going to need a loom. That's why the warp-weighted loom was such an enormously important invention for our ancient ancestors, although nobody knows who to give credit for the work. It's a basic system, but it's very effective. A warp loom is made of two vertical upright parts, a warp beam across the top, a shed rod, a heddle rod, and then a set of stone, metal, or ceramic weights to apply tension to the threads and hold them straight. The weighted threads were then tied so they didn't untwist while being spun. By using these tools, our ancestors could create not only clothing but also rugs, blankets, and even large-scale works of art like tapestries. The oldest known evidence of warp loom was found in Çatalhöyük, Anatolia, Turkey, and consists of a collection of loom weights that are thought to be about 9,000 years old. Amazingly, the same technique using the same machinery is still used to create clothing and textiles in some parts of rural Norway today. The county of Somerset in England is steeped in myths and legends. It is, after all, home of Glastonbury Tor and the world-famous Glastonbury Festival. It's also home to the Tar Steps. They're not quite as famous as Glastonbury Tor, but the legends behind them are no less fantastical. It's even said that the steps are where the devil likes to lay down when he wants to sunbathe. Nobody's ever managed to snag a photograph of the devil at the site, but that doesn't change the fact that this is the oldest known bridge of its kind. Each of the 17 stone slabs that make up the bridge weighs more than 2 tons and have been in place for at least 3,000 years. We should note that nobody knows how old the bridge is, and it might be far older than the estimate. The story about the devil can be traced back to the 14th century when he was said to have been driven away by a local parson. The bridge would already have been ancient by then. It's a primitive way of crossing a waterway by modern standards, but would have been considered quite a feat of engineering all those thousands of years ago. If you've ever been woken up from a pleasant dream by an alarm clock and wanted to curse the person who invented them, direct your curses at Plato. The famous Greek philosopher came up with the idea 2,400 years ago after growing tired of students arriving late to his lectures because they'd overslept. Clocks as we know them didn't exist back then, so Plato's creation looks more like a kettle. It functions more like a kettle in some respects too. To make the alarm work, water is heated up and pushed through a series of tubes as it expands, eventually reaching a sealed vessel that whistled as pressure built inside it. The idea was that the students would place the alarm over a fire at night and it would heat up slowly, thus waking them up at a reasonable time when the whistling began and sending them on their way to Plato. The exact amount of sleep the device would allow you to get would have varied depending on how much water you put into it, so presumably Plato provided his students with instructions on that matter. It's a clever system, and an invention that's been depriving students of excuses for missing class ever since. The island of Jersey in the English Channel contains more ancient monuments than you'd expect it to, given how small it is. The most impressive of them is La Haugby. This is a passage grave, but might have also been used in rituals during the Neolithic era. If archaeologists are right about that suspicion, it wouldn't have been the only time the usage of the monument changed. It's also been used as an unconventional Christian chapel, not once but twice at different points in history. While dating stone monuments isn't an exact science, the oldest of the burials here indicates an age of around 5,500 years. It's one of the best preserved passage tombs in the world, still fully intact and demonstrating the strangeness of these burial mounds, which feature a crawl space so people could pass through the middle of them. The orientation of the passage is very specific. It's aligned to receive light from the sun and illuminate the deepest parts of the chamber on the day of the solstice. The two Christian chapels were both added to the top of the mound during the medieval period, one of which still remains and features 14th century fresco paintings. We've already looked at one hidden pyramid in South America, so there's no harm in checking out another. This is La Danta in Guatemala. It's the most impressive structure in El Mirador, the legendary lost city of the Maya. This was one of the civilization's most important cities 2,600 years ago and thrived for 3 centuries before construction slowed down and people began to move away. It was abandoned by the end of the 9th century and then swiftly swallowed by the jungle, thus explaining why archaeologists didn't find it for almost 1,000 years. La Dante, which is a pyramid-shaped temple, is the only one of the city structures that pokes out above the tree line. It's 236 feet tall and has a volume of just under 100 million cubic feet. Based on the construction methods we think the Maya used to build it, 15 million full days of labor would have been required to finish it. Visitors are free to climb the staircase that leads up the eastern face of this temple, which offers incredible views across the panorama of trees that surround this ancient wonder. Speaking of wonders, there are many people who believe that Sigiriya in Sri Lanka should be recognized as the 8th wonder of the ancient world. It's certainly one of the most impressive stone fortresses you're ever likely to see. The name Sigiriya means lion rock, and the fortress atop it was built by order of King Kashpaya during the 5th century. The limited historical records we have from that time suggest that he built his palace here so he'd be safe from attacks by forces led by his brother. Even the gardens that surround the king's old fortress are significant because they're the oldest landscaped gardens on the planet. It's thought that the palace was once full of magnificent paintings, but sadly, very few of them still exist. Those that do are considered to be the earliest examples of Sri Lankan classical realism. Further paintings can be found in the caves at the foot of the rock. After King Kashpayak passed away, his old palace became a Buddhist monastery, and that's how Sigiriya stayed until it became abandoned in the 14th century. We have no idea why such a stunning creation was abandoned, but it's a popular tourist destination now. Philo of Byzantium had a personal robotic servant 2,300 years ago. We know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. He wasn't even the only person who had one. Heron of Alexandria had a robot servant too. Both men were kind enough to leave behind full schematics for their creations. They're impressive, but their purpose was extremely limited. In fact, all they could do was pour wine. The human-shaped robots had wheels and brakes. When their brakes were released, they would roll toward a guest of Philo or Heron, who would then place their wine receptacle into the robot's metal hand. The pressure of the cup depressed a latch. The latch made the robot tilt a pitcher of wine in its other hand, and the cup of the party guest would then be filled. Once the wine cup reached a certain weight, it would trigger a second latch, which would then tell the machine to stop pouring. This would have been nothing more than an amusing party trick for Philo or Heron, but it would have left their guests astounded. Come to think of it, we'd quite like a robot wine servant of our own. The ancient Romans were truly ahead of their time. Among their most notable contributions to civilization were their aqueducts, sewer systems, and pipe networks that distributed water to residents and carried waste away. However, for many years, the pipes were subject to controversy, with some suggesting that the lead in the pipes caused widespread lead poisoning, which led to the downfall of the Roman Empire. Although we still don't have a clear answer on that front, recent research has revealed that the Romans began using lead pipes earlier than we previously thought. A team of British and French researchers took core samples from the Ostia Antica, a harbor city of ancient Rome, located about 2 miles from the shore. They used carbon dating to determine the age of each layer, which provided a record of flooding on the Tiber and the buildup of silt. The layers of soil provided a detailed record of the use of lead pipes, with researchers measuring the levels of lead in the layers. According to their findings, Romans started using lead pipes as early as 200 BCE and stopped around 250 AD, which is earlier than previously believed. If you were to visit Turkey's Phrygian Valley in Anatolia, you'd find deep cart tracks all over the landscape, running on for miles. There may not seem anything odd about that at first, but the problem here is that these can't possibly be real cart tracks. They're cut into the bedrock and must be millions of years old. Obviously, that predates the creation of carts. It also predates the existence of humans. What then made these marks? It has to have been something heavy. At their deepest, the grooves penetrate 3 feet into the ground. It's hard to write them off as a geological oddity because they're so evenly spaced, which suggests that they were made artificially. Faced with such a baffling conundrum, it's no wonder that some people wonder whether they were left behind by alien visitors. The history of the area says that the first roads in Anatolia were made by the Hittites about 3,600 years ago, but these grooves are much older. Even if we go against the evidence and consider that they might have been made thousands of years ago rather than millions, how were they carved? And to what end? There are no answers here. There are incredible historical sites all over Peru, some of which date back thousands of years, so it's unsurprising that a few of them get missed by all but the most well-informed of visitors. Hardly anyone knows about the stone prison in the tiny town of Hakira, deep in the Peruvian highlands, but it's definitely worth seeing if you ever find yourself in the area. Nobody seems to know exactly when the megalithic prison was created, but the most widely believed theory is that it was used by early Spanish invaders who wanted to keep the Inca people out of the way while they stole all their silver and gold. Some people even believe that enslaved Inca people were forced to create the prison themselves, but the sophistication and quality of the doors and chambers suggest otherwise. This may be a much older structure, one which the Spanish just happened to come across and decide to repurpose? The stone shaping technology required to create these openings in such precise shapes shouldn't have existed at the time they were allegedly made. And yet here they are. This could be yet another example of ancient technology that's been lost over the years. We've already discussed the ancient Romans in this video, and they're quite rightly credited with inventing many things. They did not, however, invent the Patara pipes of Turkey, even though historians spent many decades believing that they did. We can see why they were confused. The pipe stretched between the sites of many former Roman settlements and outposts in the region, but the Romans built their settlements to line up with the pipes. The pipes were already there when the Romans arrived. Archaeologists are fairly sure about this for a few reasons, the most persuasive of which is that there's no written record of the Romans creating the Patara pipes. The Romans like to write about their achievements at length, so it's odd that they wouldn't mention a marvel like the pipes. The design of the pipes is also totally at odds with the typical ancient Roman architectural style. A Roman pillar was discovered in Patara in 1993, and upon the pillar are inscriptions detailing everything the Romans did during their time there, right down to the creation of basic roads. If the Romans didn't create the pipes, though, who did? The Cave of Cusa in Campobella di Mazzara, Italy, is a fascinating site with a rich history. The ancient Greeks had been using the quarry to extract limestone for 150 years before they were forced to abandon it in the face of an invasion by Hannibal Mago's Carthaginian forces in 409 BCE. This unexpected departure resulted in the workers leaving behind their tools and unfinished carved stones. In many ways, time has stood still at the site ever since. Despite the abandonment, the site remains a testament to the Greeks' impressive skill and artistry. The quarry's limestone was used to build many of the magnificent structures in the nearby ancient Greek city of Selinunte. Visitors can now witness the remnants of the ancient quarry and see roughly 60 blocks of chiseled limestone left behind, including whole columns that were never transported to their intended destination. Designated as a Sicilian archaeological zone, the Cave of Cusa provides an intriguing glimpse into the lives and work of the ancient Greeks, as well as a unique opportunity to explore the remnants of an abandoned quarry that was once a thriving source of limestone. In the 18th century, the discovery of the Leyden jar revolutionized the study of electricity. The glass jar stores high-voltage electric charge between the inner and outer conductors made of metal foil. The metal terminal protrudes from the jar lid to contact with the inner foil. Peter van Musschenbroek of Leyden, Netherlands, and German cleric Ewald Georg von Kleist discovered the Leyden jar independently in 1745. The Leyden jar was used to conduct early experiments in electricity and became the first means of accumulating and preserving electric charge in large quantities. This allowed researchers to discharge electric charge as per their will, overcoming a significant limit to early research into electrical conduction. Leyden jars are still used in education to demonstrate the principles of electrostatics. The Leyden jar is estimated to hold a maximum charge of 20,000 to 60,000 volts, making it a high-voltage device. The jar was first used in electrostatic experiments and later in high-voltage equipment like spark gap radio transmitters and electrotherapy machines. The Greeks had known about the ability of amber to attract particles when rubbed, so we could almost call it an ancient Greek invention, but they never refined it into anything quite like the Leyden jar. Planning large-scale military operations was very difficult thousands of years ago when nobody had invented the telephone or the radio. Different armies came up with different solutions, but Aeneas of Greece came up with a particularly innovative one 2,400 years ago. His invention was the hydraulic telegraph. In practice, it was little more than a stick in a bottle of water with pre-agreed messages attached to the stick. If the two encampments of soldiers needed to communicate with each other, they would each signal each other by torchlight and then pull the plug on the bottle. When the water level has dropped far enough to reveal the desired message, another torchlight signal would be sent to tell the other encampment to put the plug back in. So long as both encampments did their jobs properly and they were using identical hydraulic telegraphs, they could send each other basic messages. It's not exactly WhatsApp, but it was a massive advantage for the Greeks over their less sophisticated enemies. It was certainly a faster and more nuanced way of communicating across long distances than smoke signals, which were the only other option at the time. There's no way we can make a whole video about mysterious ancient technology without paying at least one visit to Ireland. The Emerald Isle is full of enigmatic ancient megaliths, but perhaps none more mysterious than Carrowmore. The archaeologists who discovered it in Sligo got halfway through the process of excavating it before they realized that they weren't dealing with a regular barrow. While parts of the structure admittedly look like a barrow, the design simply isn't consistent with any other barrow in the country. For a start, it appears to have been used for more than just burials. There are tombs at Carrowmore that are more than 5,000 years old, but there's also a mound that looks like a little stage, and a trench dug around the mound as if it were intended for people to stand in and look up at the stage. Did the ancient inhabitants of Sligo come here and perform plays in front of the dead? Why are there such strong traces of charcoal in the soil? Carrowmore is a place that forces us to ask plenty of questions, but it's not so great at giving us answers. Returning to the topic of pre-Columbian times in the Americas, what are we to make of these stone discs which have been recovered from sites all over Southern California? Archaeologists have taken to referring to them as cogstones because of their shape, but it's unlikely that they were ever part of any machine. Their purpose remains a mystery. Historians have pointed out that there's more than a passing resemblance between these so-called cogstones and the equally controversial bronze gears that were uncovered in Peru some time ago. But a link between the two sets of artifacts hasn't yet been established. The majority of the stones can be found in the Santa Ana River Valley, raising the possibility that an ancient and unknown civilization was based there in the distant past. While it's never easy to provide a precise date for stone artifacts, scientists think that the majority of the stones were carved between 5,000 and 8,000 years ago. Strangely, many of the stones have a perforation in the center that's perfectly square in shape. We'd use machinery to achieve such a perfect shape if we were making these stone objects today, but how these ancient craftspeople managed to do it without such technology in the past is unknown. There's a network of underground tunnels running beneath Gilmerton Cove, which is close to Edinburgh in Scotland. The tunnels are so well known to the locals that they've been open as a fun attraction for children since 2003, who think of them as little more than a playground with labyrinth qualities. Their true history is a little darker than that. The tunnels are thought to be over 2,000 years old, and over the centuries are said to have hosted smugglers, witches, the Knights Templar, and ancient druids. The true origin of these stone tables and chairs carved directly into the rock has never been identified. A local blacksmith by the name of George Patterson claimed to have carved the tunnels himself in 1724, but it's now thought more likely that he simply rediscovered them and tried to pass off the work as his own. He only partially cleared away the rubble when he found the entrance to the tunnels, which would explain why 2 of them are still blocked. The design of the tunnels has more in common with Celtic traditions than anything 18th century, but regrettably, we'll probably never know for sure. In 2016, art experts and historians claim to have solved what was once described as the world's biggest small mystery. Their claim relates to a 500-year-old set of Boxwood miniature carvings that have long confounded academics and scholars. The representations of heaven, hell, and life on Earth carved in intricate detail on the artifacts are as confusing as they are impressive. They were the must-have item of their era. King Henry VIII of England carried one around everywhere, which led to them becoming seen as a status symbol. They appear to have been cherished for around 20 years, and then they disappeared from history. There are no contemporary records of who made them or how. We can't even recreate them using modern methods. Only 135 examples have survived to the present day. 30 of them were studied by New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2016, revealing that each of the pieces was created by making a circular piece of boxwood, bisecting it, slicing it into thin discs, carving the discs, and then reassembling them so neatly that the seams are invisible. The wood comes from Belgium, and amazingly, all of the work on every piece appears to have been carried out by the same person. The Ptolemy world map is a fascinating depiction of the world as it was known to the Greco-Roman societies of the 2nd century. It was based on the information contained in Ptolemy's book Geography, which was written around 150 CE. The map is notable for being the first to use longitudinal and latitudinal lines and to specify terrestrial locations using celestial observations. Although Ptolemy's work originally came with maps, none have survived to the present day. Instead, the map that we're familiar with today was reconstructed from Ptolemy's coordinates by Byzantine monks under the direction of Maximus Planutus around 1295. The map's continents are Europe, Asia, and Libya, while the world ocean is only visible to the west. However, due to Ptolemy's mistake in measuring the circumference of the Earth, the Mediterranean is made to extend too far in terms of degrees of arc. The map also shows India being bounded by the Indus and Ganges rivers, but its peninsula is much shorter. Instead, Sri Lanka is depicted as being greatly enlarged. The geography and the map derived from it likely played an important role in the expansion of the Roman Empire to the east, as many Roman trading ports have been identified as India. So much controversy surrounds the existence of Nepenthe, the near mystical ancient Greek drink of forgetfulness. Some people refuse to believe that it existed at all. Allegedly, Nepenthe was the world's first antidepressant, a wine-like drink so potent that it would erase bad memories and take away sorrow in the process. The world could use a drink like that today, so if it was real, what happened to it? It's easy to say that the drink was just a work of ancient Greek fiction, but that doesn't seem to fit with the evidence. The drink is mentioned in Homer's Odyssey and also referenced in works by Pliny the Elder and Dioscorides. It would be a strange thing for 3 noted ancient writers to just make up something out of nothing. It seems more likely that Nepenthe was real, although we may never resolve the mystery of what it really contained. Pliny the Elder wondered whether it might have been borage, whereas some modern writers think it was opium. Both substances would have had the potential to make anyone who ingested them forget about their troubles for a while. What do you imagine the first electronic instrument was? And when do you think it was invented? If your answer to that question was the electric guitar, sorry to tell you that you're wrong. It was in fact the Telharmonium, although we won't hold it against you if you've never heard of it. The colossal device was also known as the dynamophone, which was invented by a man named Thaddeus Cahill in 1896. His machine transmitted electronic signals over wires that could be heard as music through horn-like speakers. You could even dial in and listen to it over the telephone. Because it used tone wheels to generate sound, the Telharmonium can be considered to be an ancestor of the Hammond organ, and perhaps even the more modern synthesizers we see and hear today. The design of the speakers went on to influence the creation of the first electronic amplifier. Despite being so influential, the device was not a success. At 210 tons, it was simply too big to be practical, and the last of the 3 working models Cahill built was destroyed in 1962. Let's dive even deeper into the past and take a look at the Antikythera mechanism, a perplexing and sophisticated device that was salvaged from a 2,000-year-old ancient Greek shipwreck. Everyone who's ever studied it agrees that it was ahead of its time, but some feel it's even more advanced than others. One school of thought says that it runs on clockwork, but comes from a time before such a concept had been thought of, so it represents the creation of clockwork technology. Another school of thought said that because of the sophistication of the object, which would have been able to track the precise locations of planets and stars in the night sky, it should be thought of as the world's first computer. Either one would be an impressive accolade. Because it came from inside a shipwreck, most experts concur that it was used as a navigational tool at sea, but that begs the question as to why no other device like this has ever been found. Perhaps this is the only one that was ever made, and its inventor went down to the bottom of the sea with the ship. When tunnels need to be dug through rock in the modern age, explosives and dynamite are generally used to help with the process. The ancient Romans didn't have that option, which makes the Vespasianus Titus tunnel all the more remarkable as a feat of engineering. Found in Samandağ in Turkey at more than 4,000 feet long, it remains the largest human-made tunnel in the world, despite being finished in the 2nd century. Today, the tunnel is bone dry, but it was initially built as a way of diverting a river and preventing the port city of Seleucia from becoming silted up. Water ran off the mountains during the rainy season and flooded the city, so the only way to solve the problem was to force the water to change course and go through the mountain instead. The work was carried out by a combination of legionnaires, sailors, and prisoners, and carried on for decades. Even though the tunnel is required to keep the city safe, the fact that it's still in perfect condition today is a testament to the skill of those ancient workers. The precise function of Vimana is a matter of some debate among scientists and historians. You'll find references to them in a number of ancient Hindu and Sanskrit texts, and they appear to have been flying chariots. They might even have been entire flying palaces. The first reference to a Vimana appears in a Sanskrit text known as Veda, written 3,500 years ago. It's a descriptive passage which claims that Vimana rose into the sky using a combination of fire and water. There's even a technical section that claims the craft contained 12 pillars, a wheel, 60 controls, and 300 pivots. If it was only mentioned in that one text, we could dismiss it as fanciful. But Vimanas also appear in Ramayana texts, where they're described as vehicles that were only available to the aristocracy and royalty. As if that weren't enough, they appear yet again in Mahabharata texts. The idea of powered flight existing thousands of years ago ought to be absurd. But why do so many ancient writers and record keepers claim to have seen them with their own eyes? We've already seen one spectacular ancient Roman invention in the shape of the Vespasianus Titus tunnel. Now here's another one in the form of the Connett Ferrand, which would have to be considered the most incredible ancient aqueduct ever created, not least because it's underground. Also known as the Gadara aqueduct, this enormous structure took over a century to build, beginning in the year 90. Its purpose was to transport water to the Roman Hellenistic Decapolis, a part of the world that is now split between Syria and Jordan. It's more than 100 miles long, and all of it was built by hand using simple tools. Over 50,000 people lived in Gadara at the time the aqueduct was built, most of whom were academics and scholars. After the structure was completed, it went from being a parched city to a place so abundant with water that senators had their own private swimming pools, like Hollywood celebrities do today. The most impressive feature of the aqueducts is the series of sloping shafts that were incorporated from the surface down into the tunnels, allowing the workers inside them to breathe as they went about their work. Over 2 million cubic feet of limestone has been displaced by the time the aqueduct was complete, a truly monumental feat of engineering. Our homes today are full of electronic appliances that provide us with great convenience. How tedious would the task of washing our plates and cutlery be without a dishwasher, for example? Most of us think of dishwashers as being a modern luxury. But the first patent for a working dishwasher was filed in the United States of America in 1850 by a man named Joel Houghton. The schematics he provided with his patent application show a machine that still would have required a degree of manual labor and might not have been especially reliable, but would still definitely have been more convenient than washing every cup and plate by hand. It wasn't until 27 years later that Josephine Cochran, another American, came up with the first commercially viable dishwasher design. And not until 1896 that her machine was demonstrated to the public at the World's Fair. Houghton may not have been able to make any money from his invention because of its many complicated mechanisms and lack of reliability, but he was almost half a century ahead of his time when he thought of it. The steam train was invented in the United Kingdom, and trains are still a vital transport link within the country today. But these days, they're almost all powered by electricity. The evolution of trains didn't go directly from steam to electricity, though. There were a few experimental train types trialed between the two eras, including the Crystal Palace Pneumatic Railway. This was an atmospheric railway, one that made use of air pressure differentials to propel railway carriages down the track. It was designed by Thomas Webster Rammel. The design bore some similarities to the proposed Hyperloop systems of today. Train capsules would be sucked down airtight tunnels at high speeds, encountering limited friction upon the way. He successfully operated the line for a little over 2 months and almost saw his idea enter mass production with a second line planned between London's Waterloo and Whitehall. But the project was called off before it could be finished. Nobody seems to know why the idea wasn't taken farther, but if Hyperloop is ever a success, part of the credit should be given to Rammel.